Welcome to Bass Talk with Hagen and Hayes. This is Series 2, Episode 2, and today's topic is how to curate a concert program. Good afternoon, Susan.
Good morning, David. How are you?
Very well, thank you. And how do you curate a concert program?
Well, I think this is a really fun topic because you and I both put together a lot of recital
Yes.
programs for ourselves and for students. Um, and sometimes I just choose music that I really desperately want to play, and it's not necessarily the best way I think to gather a program, except that then I know my excitement for it will be palpable, and then it's a matter of picking the order, a good order to put the pieces in. Other times I'll have a program where there's really a theme or a concept behind it. A lot of people talk about, weddings. Oh, it's the theme of the wedding. That was not my wedding. My wedding was not like that at all. But my concerts sometimes are. Now, how about you? What do you do?
You're right. If there's a theme, that's actually quite easy because everything has to fit within the theme. My students have often had to do programs for an exam, and they have to have some kind of theme. And often we've done player composers, which is quite good because that includes Bottesini, Dragonetti, Kuzovitsky, Teppo, Hautaho, Simon Gauthier, Tony Osborne. There's so many player composers. So
David
that
Hayes.
well, I wouldn't say that. But it's so nice that it really opens up the possibilities. But when I'm putting a program together, I'm always thinking about what starts the program, what will end the program, what sits in the middle. And I tend to write a list of all the pieces I'm going to play and then just start moving them around. And I like to get a feel for it. Some pieces are fantastic to start a program or to end. Some are just in the middle. So they have to sit in the middle. And I really enjoy trying to balance the program so it feels right. And it's interesting if you move one piece, often you have to move five pieces
Right.
for me to get the balance right. And it's something I've always done. I've done it from when I was at the Royal College of Music when I was a student. I was always the one putting the programs together for our bass quartet. I really enjoyed searching for repertoire and balancing programs. What about you?
Well, one of the things I do is, like you were saying, you make a list, but if I put it on paper, I start crossing it out and moving it around, and then I'm like, oh, wait, let me use numbers so I know what order things go in. So I have recently, well, not recently fallen in love with Post-its, but I've recently started using Post-its for putting a program together because it's really easy to peel one off and move it around and not worry about dropping them. Like if it's index cards or pieces of paper, they'll end up on the floor. It's just the way I am. So I love the Post-its for this reason. And you're right. If I move one piece, oftentimes I've got to shuffle several others to make it
Mm.
right. But you don't want a whole bunch of slow pieces right next to each other because your audiences start going to get restless. I think even if they're three or four of the most beautiful slow lyrical pieces you've ever heard in your life, it's just too much of the same at once. And yeah, I tend to think first of my opening piece and then my closing piece. I want to have really strong bookends, whether they're loud and upbeat and fast and funky, or I love to open with song lines that you've written. That's one of my favorite ways to open a program. It's just beautiful and singing, and it lets people really hear the bass at its best, I think. And then if I have guests, a lot of times in my recitals, my dad will join me, and it's a matter of do we bop back and forth? Do I have him come on and off a bunch of times? Do we plunk it in the middle? Do we put it at the end? And I've kind of experimented with a lot of different options, but I have decided I kind of like having him in the middle so that it can be like a a dad sandwich with Susan Bread. There's double bass solo on both sides of the program.
I think I suggested that to you
Yes, you
because
did.
it's really nice because you get different sound quality. You have a group of
Yes.
unaccompanied pieces, then suddenly you have with guitar accompaniment, which just changes the colors completely, and
Right.
then you go back to solo bass.
And they
And
can
you're
hear
right,
what they heard at the beginning.
it's always about trying to make it interesting.
Yeah.
And I try to do this with my students. Is the first piece if they're playing a diploma exam or whatever. The first piece, is it going to be one that really grabs the examiner by the throat, or is it
Right.
the one that comes from nowhere?
Yep.
And Teppo Cadenza by Tepa Hautaho is one of those good pieces because it starts on open E and it
Mm,
starts from nowhere. So there's silence before you start. And
powerful.
yeah, it's another way of grabbing the audience's attention, which is really nice. I think that's just as powerful as playing a big showy piece to
Right.
grab their attention. It's interesting how different pieces can have the same effect.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't always like to start with something that's super upbeat and fast as my first piece. I have this sort of probably old fashioned thought process. I do this with my students too. I like the first piece to be something that's going to grab my audience's attention, but also allow me to settle in.
Mm,
Settle into the room, what the acoustics are like, or settle into the, oh my gosh, I haven't given a recital in, 2 months or 20 years or whatever it is. I remember the first recital I gave after graduate school. I think it was like 15 or 20 years after I was out of school.
yeah.
And the idea seemed like such a great concept. And then the day came and everything was fine. And then about 10 minutes before, I thought, what did I just do to myself? Why am I doing this? Oh my God, why am I doing this? And then I thought, my first piece is beautiful and absolutely helps me settle in. And I was so glad I did that because I got on the stage, I started playing, and I immediately calmed down and felt really happy and in the moment. But I think sometimes if you start with something that's technically super hard, when I was in college,
Mm.
I used to think, get it out of the way, then it's done. But now I think, save that for maybe the second or third piece and get yourself really settled in first. And I had I have a trio at Berkeley, different students than the trio I had last year. And last year I said to them, you have an upbeat, really hard piece. You have a set of, it was a suite of the Tony Osborne party pieces. Really cute, not incredibly hard, but totally peppy, and audiences would love it. And, they had a whole bunch of different things. And so finally I said to them, start with the Osborne because it's adorable. Your
Mm,
audience will love it, and it's
yes.
not hard for you. And so you'll settle in. And they loved that idea.
It's interesting because we've got the most repertoire we've ever had. So
Yeah.
your choice of repertoire I know is fantastic, far more than when I was starting out when I was graduating from college. And it's interesting that you can really play whatever style of music you like now. And even in 2023, we're still evangelizing about the bass and
Yep.
how fantastic an instrument it is. So honestly, it almost doesn't matter what piece you play. They're going to be so astounded the bass
Yeah.
can do anything apart from the elephant, which is
Right.
absolutely amazing. We had a concert in Norwich a few weeks ago, and and just everybody came up to talk to me and said, I didn't know the bass, it had such a wide range, or you could play
Right.
harmonics, and I think
Yeah.
I'd played pizzicato pieces and I played arco. I must have played up in harmonics and sul ponticello, col legno, double stops. So I introduced a lot of different playing effects as well.
Right.
And I think they're absolutely astounded that it has so many different colors. And I think that's what's interesting nowadays is that you can put so many different types of programs together for whatever audience you're playing to.
Yep. It's interesting because I've been playing Simone Garcia's Concerto for
Mm,
Amplified Double Bass and String
mm,
Orchestra. I'm playing in November. It's going to be my third performance in 12 months. I do it again next April.
yes.
What I think is interesting is how do the orchestras program around a bass concerto? And, I've done the Bottesini concerto in the past and the Bottesini duo and things like that. And sometimes they make it Italian night.
Mm,
Sometimes I swear they make it like freak show day. There was one orchestra that decided to do a piccolo concerto and a double bass concerto in the same concert. And I thought, really? Who wants either of those? And this one that I'm doing, they decided to make everything Spanish.
right, that's good.
So they have, and it's an adorable program. They've got, Sarasate and all sorts of different Spanish, either Spanish composers or composers writing about Spain.
Mm,
And so that's really a cute way to do it too. And again, that one is a theme, which is
mm,
nice. I remember one orchestra decided they wanted to put the double bass concerto on a pops program.
mm.
And I thought, well, I know that they're thinking because it was the in their mind light classical music, not Brahms or Beethoven. But I thought I don't think it really belongs on a pops program, but I wasn't going to say no because I still wanted to perform
Mm.
it. So I went with it. But gosh, I remember one of my recitals in grad school. I was doing the entire third Bach cello suite,
Mm.
um, the Bottesini concerto, and a whole bunch of other things. And I think Ed suggested, no, I suggested starting with the Bach because it was hard and I wanted to get it out of
Mm.
the way. It's hard and it was long. And he looked at me and said, you should play one short piece first, get settled into the room. And I thought, ugh, I really just want to play this Bach and get it done. And I think that that stuck with me though. Always have the first piece be something that you can settle into. And you're right, no matter what you're playing, the audience
Mm.
is going to be impressed by how amazing this instrument that we play is.
I enjoy working to a theme. I like programs which have a theme, and I've done many concerts and which have things like that. And I've done with my students. We had one which was in memory of my teacher, František Pošta. So that
Mm.
was a Czech program, and there were no ensembles for the young bass players. So I wrote Slavonic Dance Number One, which was nice. And then we did
Nice.
a celebration of Bottesini, and again there was no Bottesini for beginners or Italian music.
Mm.
So I wrote the
Mm-hmm.
Tarantella for the juniors,
Oh,
and it
nice.
was a really nice way of doing it. We did a concert for Bert Turetsky's 85th birthday, so I commissioned lots of pieces, and we did I think a couple of Bert's quartets, and then I wrote place in New England just in harmonics
Oh,
for the
yes.
junior. That time I had six in the junior bass ensemble, so I wrote it all in harmonics, and it was
Nice.
really quite nice to be able to include the juniors as well. So I enjoy themed programs. I really
Yeah.
like a theme, and we're putting our programs together for April, which is nice.
Yes, we are.
And it's centered around Kuzovitsky, but it's also developing, so it's becoming a little bit more about player composers, which I like. I
Right.
always think
Right.
that's fascinating because it opens up so much repertoire and so many different
Yeah.
styles for an audience.
Right.
Mm.
Right. And I think we have now more than ever. I think, of course, I wasn't alive 100 years ago, and I don't know what's been lost. But well, I might have. Some days I feel like I've been alive that long, but I feel like there are so many player composers out there right now,
Mm.
and that opens up so much music that we can
Mm.
play, and it's really fun, and it's great because you and I personally know a lot of the people that have written the pieces we're going to
Exactly.
play. And,
Yes.
oh, I
Yeah.
love that.
It's nice to be able to talk to an audience about not only about the piece, but the composer. And certainly if you know the composer on a personal basis,
Hmm.
it's really nice. And if the piece has been written for you and dedicated to you, or you gave the world premiere, I
Yes.
think it just adds something a bit more interest to
Yeah.
the piece. Because when you walk on a stage as a bass player, most of the audience have never heard of a bass. I've never heard
Yeah.
a bass before. They've never heard of the repertoire we're going to play. They've never heard of you. And if you can try and make it interesting by the introductions as well as the playing, I think you've got them right from the start. So
Hmm.
I always try and put a really nice balanced program together, but also try and hopefully enthuse about all the pieces I'm playing.
Yeah. And you know what? That brings up another interesting point, I think. Talking, speaking
Mm.
to your audience. When I was in school, we were literally taught to you bow to acknowledge they're there, but you don't make eye contact. You look above their heads to the back of the hall and you never speak. And I remember thinking, wow, that just feels so isolated. Like we're all in this room together, but I'm supposed to pretend you're not there. And I'm not sure if it was just the tradition here in Boston or in America, or if it was to try to help students not be nervous that there are people in the room. But how would you not notice them because they're clapping and making noise? So, I never questioned it. I just sort of went with it. And I had a trio with my sister and a good friend of ours who's a cellist, and we would play concerts and they would talk between the pieces. And I remember thinking, like, I could talk. And I remember one day saying, "Oh, can I introduce one of the pieces?" And they were both like, "Oh, no, 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 it's fine. We don't need you to do that." And I thought, well, I know I'm just sort of like a blundering bass player, but it would be good for me to like learn how to speak. And my husband Kevin is a clarinet player, and he was in the Air Force band program, And for a lot of their stuff, he was in a clarinet quartet,
Mm,
or a wind quintet, depending on which stage of his career he was at. And I went to the clarinet quartet, which later turned into a clarinet trio, which
mm,
actually was quite lovely. As a bass player, I didn't know
mm,
what it was going to be like. But the concerts, they would get up and speak. They would talk about, who they were and where they were from, because people love that from the military bands. But then they would always talk about the pieces. And I remember saying to him, the first concert I went to, I said, "But you spoke to the audience." And he laughed. He said, "Well, of course we did. What did you think we were going to do?" And I said, "Well, I was trained to ignore them." And I started thinking, I want to do this. So when I started sort of recitaling again, a few years ago, I would speak a little bit about each piece.
mm,
And at first, I didn't know the people whose music I was playing. I hadn't met you yet. I played a piece by Lloyd Goldstein. I hadn't been in touch with him yet. All of these people were just names
mm,
on a piece of paper. And so it was, I found this piece in such and such a place, and here's what I like about it, and that sort of thing. And then I started to get to know the people that are writing the
mm.
music. And
Yes.
now I can say, this was written by my dear friend David Hayes, who's a bass player, a teacher, a composer in England, and, tell a little bit about
Mm,
personal aspects of
mm,
the people, and the audience loves that too.
mm,
And one of my friends who's in the Boston Symphony came to one of my recitals, and he said, "Oh, the playing was great." He said, "But the thing that blew me away was you can speak to your audience." He said, "I've never done that. I don't think I could. I think I'd freeze and get nervous." And I thought, yes, when I first started playing as an extra with the Boston Symphony, when you would bow, everyone was facing the conductor. And then they had this earth shattering idea, other orchestras were starting to do it, to turn towards the audience during the
mm,
applause. And at first, I think some players were saying, "Well, but we're not supposed to look at them." And management was saying, "Yeah, if you interact with the audience a little bit, they might feel more personally connected."
mm.
And I think that's true in a recital too. Speak to them, tell them what you love about a piece, or how you know the composer, or if you don't know anything about the composer. That sometimes happens. You'll stumble across a piece and you have no idea who this person is or was, and admit it, to say it. And someone afterwards will most likely come up to you and say, "Oh, I know about this composer, let me tell you." And it's great because then you learn too. But I do think that the interaction is really special.
I was very impressed that when you said that you've been taught what not to do
Mm,
in a recital. I don't think we were taught anything when I look back. I
really?
think everything I've done, I've learned. And the things I said about nobody's ever heard of you, heard of the repertoire and bass,
Yeah.
that came from one of my teachers, Bronwyn Nash. And
Mm.
she was giving recitals when very few other people were. And she was very eloquent and very pretty and she's always very elegant and she chose nice programs. So she was able to break barriers down. So I saw how she did it.
Yeah.
And in any group I ever played in, there's usually at least one person who's quite confident to talk to an audience,
Right.
and then everybody else said, "Oh no, you're much better than us. You do it." So I ended up doing it all the time, and then you get used
Okay.
to it, and then it becomes
Yeah.
very easy. And I have to teach my students how to talk to an audience because they're going to have to learn how to do it.
You teach them
And
the Princess Diana way, right?
very much so. Well, you only say two or three words and then stop. Two or three words. So you talk in statements, not in
Mm.
sentences. And that way you can't go wrong. And I was doing it the other night and with a student, and they were saying the next piece we would like to play, stop, is I don't know, something by David Hayes. Stop. This is for two double basses. Stop. And if you've got five little bits of information, you can
Right.
say that, and you sound like you know what you're talking about.
Yes.
If you say maybe eight words, you can trip over them.
Right.
Once you get to a certain point, you're confident enough to forget about the statements and talk to an audience. And I enjoy talking to an audience. I enjoy telling them the history of the piece or a little bit about the
Yeah.
bass or something like that. Because on the whole, it's all new to them, to most audiences,
Right.
which is
Right.
nice. And I think it does break down barriers. I think it's a really nice thing to do. But it's important that young musicians learn how to do it as well.
It is. And I remember with my Sunshine Trio last year at
Mm.
Berkeley, I was teaching them, the same way you teach your students,
Yes.
just do a few words at a time because otherwise you do stumble if you're
Mm.
not experienced with it. Once you get experience like you and I, you can just keep going
Mm.
on and on. Sometimes I worry I'm talking too much at my recitals. But it was very cute because I assigned each student, we had several different composers. I think one got to do two or three composers and the others did one or two. And I said, you need to know 5 facts about each person. And one of them, when they came to David Hayes, the fifth fact was he's really cool.
Well, that's nice.
And I
The-
said,
the-
well, that's really good, but can you find something a little bit more like
no,
about
stick with that one.
and
That's
and
the
that's what
one.
she's the girl said to me, oh no, he's totally cool. Look at his music. I have to put that in. And I said, okay,
That's nice.
great.
Let me write that one down.
Yes, David Hayes is totally cool.
Oh,
I
that's
love
nice.
it.
That's really nice.
Yeah,
You remember
it
when
worked.
I did a masterclass for your students, and I asked
Yes.
one of your students about Kuzovitsky,
Mm-hmm.
and the only thing she could come up with was he was a bit mad.
Yeah,
I
she's
think
like, he's crazy. I was like, is that all you know about him? And I'm not sure that he's the most crazy of all of our composers. So really,
one of my
and
students was playing a study by Edward Nanny
mm,
for an audition for an assessment at school. And so again, I always used to say, "Tell me 5 things about Edward Nanny." He's professor based at the Paris Conservatoire, I think the 1930s and 40s, and Sean just used to roll his eyes every time I said, "Tell me 5 things," like any teenager would. And he went in for the assessment, and they say, "What are you going to play?" So I'd like to play a study by Edward Nanny, and the people on the panel said, "Oh, tell me a little bit about Edward Nanny."
ha ha.
And when Sean came out, he told me this, and I said, "I'm a genius. That's 10 bottles of wine to me." And I
Yes,
thought, "Yes."
absolutely.
But I said that at some point, yeah, you will email me and you will say, "Thank you so much. I was
Yes,
playing this piece in a concert, and someone came up afterwards and asked me about the composer, and I was able to have a conversation with them, not stand there like a an idiot because I knew
right.
nothing about the piece."
Yeah,
You know?
and I think that's part of when you're choosing your music for a recital or any sort of concert. I like to choose pieces I like or that
Mhm.
I want to learn, but you have to be able to convey more than just the music to your audience because like you say, we're still evangelizing about this instrument
Mhm.
and just the piece alone may be powerful, but the piece with some information will make it memorable.
Exactly. And it's so nice. I love putting concert programs together. I really and I spend hours and hours because it
Yeah,
looks so easy that you just put all these
right.
pieces together and you've got a first piece and a last piece and you just throw all the others together. But it's not like that at
No.
all. I've done this and I've talked many hours with my students about how you do it and why you do it.
Mhm.
It's just like a meal where you have a starter and a main course and a dessert.
Right.
You have to think how it balances
Yeah.
out. I think
Yeah.
it's fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's really fun. And sometimes, I don't know about you, but I'll be a couple weeks out from an actual recital and I'll say, you know what? This piece isn't fitting in the program. I have to get rid of it. And I'll oftentimes add a different piece. And yes, it means maybe I'm rushing to put it together, but when I feel like the flow of a program isn't quite right, if I can't shuffle the order of the pieces to fix it, I'll just, I call it nix. I'll just nix a piece from the program.
Mhm.
And oftentimes my programs are too long. I know that. And so oftentimes I have some wiggle room to get rid of a piece or two if I need to. And so I have a couple that I'm usually like, I'd really like to play this, but if I can't, I'll put it on the next one. And I prepare it as if I'm going to perform it. And sometimes that's the one that stays and it's a different one that ends up on the cutting room floor. But I really feel strongly that I get sort of was a sort of a new age way to describe it, but I get like a vibe that is just not the right fit with a piece.
Mm,
And sometimes I get that vibe a little late.
mm,
It's just a couple weeks before the recital, but I have to go with that gut
mm.
instinct too.
And have you ever got it wrong, where you've got the wrong program or the wrong
I'd
pieces?
love to say no, I'm always perfect, but oh yeah, absolutely. And you just sort of grin and bear it, and you know that if you could do that again, you'd have put that program together a little bit differently.
Mm.
Yeah, how about you? Have you ever gotten it wrong?
Yeah, I can remember. I can picture it in my mind's eye now as I'm talking. And it was Wells Bass weekend, and it was the opening concert. And the head of strings had said to me, "Can it be about 45 minutes? That would be perfect. No problem."
Mhm.
About 45 minutes in, we're only halfway through the program. It was, and he was sitting there with his wife. And you know, when somebody doesn't want to be there and they're trying to
Yes.
look as though they do, and
Hmm.
everything that they're doing is the exact opposite. Him and his wife, they're shuffling and they're moving around. And
Oh
I thought, oh
God.
no, we've got another 30 minutes of music still to go. I, I think I'd slightly misjudged that one. They were all good pieces, I have to say. None of them were
Yeah.
I would have
Yeah.
left out. But with hindsight, yeah, it was 45 minutes too long. It's,
I think the second recital that I did online during
mm,
the COVID lockdown was like an hour and 20 minutes, and it was supposed to be 50 to 60 minutes. And I remember looking at the clock going, "Uh-oh, we're getting to the hour mark. Do I drop a piece? Do I play faster? What do I do?" And I thought, "You know what? It's online. People can leave if they don't want to listen to it. It's fine. I worked on this stuff. I prepared it. I miscalculated
yeah.
gravely. And now I'm very careful to run a timer when I'm playing through the pieces to make sure that the timing is right. But the first recital that I
Mm,
gave was, I think, 2016 or 2017. It was the first
mm,
one I had given in, well, I guess it was about 15 years from grad
mm,
school. And I remember I was giving the premiere of Martin Wynn's
mm,
sonata. I was doing the Bottesini second concerto and then a
mm.
whole bunch of smaller pieces. And I remember just sort of like plopping them all on the program all willy nilly. That was just like completely helter skelter. There was no organization to it whatsoever. And I remember thinking, it felt funny. Like I enjoyed playing, it was
Mm.
great, but there was no rhyme or reason to the order of the program. And afterwards my parents were there and my mom was like, "There was something about it that just felt," and I said, "completely unplanned." And that's when I realized you really need to think it through.
Yeah.
And I like to think I'm pretty good at that now, but that first recital back into recital land was whoa. It was
I,
not
I
organized.
still write by hand. When I'm writing music, I'm still writing by hand, which I like.
Yes.
And I write lists by hand. So when I'm
Hmm.
putting a program together, I'll do that. And
Yeah.
then once I've sort of got a basic feel for what's going in the program, then I'll go through it and work out how many minutes. And I
Yes.
just judge them. I know approximately how long each
Yeah.
piece is.
Yep.
And for a long time, I've been doing 1 hour programs.
Right.
So it's 7:30 to 8:30, glass of wine and some refreshments after a concert. And it works really well.
Yeah.
And you can put a really nice balanced mix of programs in these pieces in these programs, and it's I really enjoy um, how you can balance them. I think it's really
Yes.
interesting. The one we did the other day in Norfolk, it was I hadn't sort of really thought it through, and it felt like every piece was pizzicato. I
Mm.
just hadn't thought this one at all. You know, I played Soliloquy, it was pizzicato, and then I was playing Little Song for Teppo by Catriona Boss with Sarah, the soprano and bass, and that was pizzicato. And then we did my piece, Homage to Teppo, that was
Mm.
pizzicato. And
Yes.
wait, maybe I got a few too many pizzicato pieces here. So right. So that's good. So I now maybe don't put soliloquy in so many pieces in so many
Right, right.
programs. Uh,
Soliloquy also sounds good, Arco.
oh, does
I was
it?
practicing it the other day in my office at Berkeley.
Right.
And for anyone who doesn't know it, it's a beautiful piece that David has written, and it's pizzicato. And when I practice things that are pizzicato, I like to practice them with the bow, make sure my intonation
Hmm.
is where it should be. And so I was using my bow, and I actually thought, oh my gosh, if I'm adding in some slurs here, this is quite lovely, like
And
Arco
and
too.
do you add the open A as
The
the drum?
open A's left hand pits.
Ah, why? Oh, I'll try that. Thank
It
you.
was stunning, and I just thought, and this is the thing, sometimes you hit a piece, and like you had a lot of pizzicato pieces in one
Hmm.
program. I remember an initial lineup for one of my programs was all the long pieces were clustered together and all the short pieces were clustered
Yeah,
together. And I thought,
yeah.
that's not good. You've got to distribute it a little bit more
Mhm.
so that there's, something short after a long one so that people don't get
It's also
too
interesting
restless.
of putting a program together when it's just one composer. We've
Yes.
done that with Teppo. We always used to have a Teppo concert, Teppo Hata Aho,
Hmm.
and it was interesting to try and put a mix together. And then what I did do after a few people said it sounds a bit the same.
Mm.
So what I then tried to do was include other Finnish music, and because
Ah,
Teppo studied in Prague and he knew me, I could put some
right.
Czech or English music in.
Yeah.
That way, I think his music sounded even better
Right.
because there was a balance between the different styles.
Yes, breaks it up a little bit. I did
Mm,
an entirely David Hayes program.
I know. I'm sorry.
It was great, but I did love because you've studied in Prague and you knew Teppo so well. You have a lot of different influences, and
Mm,
so I found that the music there, I was able to put things in an order that nothing was the same back to back. Nothing sounded
mm,
like, oh, it all had the flavor of David Hayes, but they were
mm,
all such variations to it. It was really lovely, but I can see that, dropping a few other things that are somehow
mm.
related into a program would be nice too.
That is another way of doing it. Because one composer is it's quite difficult. It depends how varied the music is you write. And
Right.
I hope that I've written enough range
Oh
across the
yeah,
pieces that you can put it
definitely.
together. I'm just writing some little 1 minute pieces, 41 minute
Nice.
pieces for our 40th birthday of my publishing company, Recital Music.
Right.
And the idea with that one is you can play them singly or in a group in any order, or you can play
Nice.
all 40 together as a
That's
40-minute
fun.
piece. So I
That's
think
really
I've
fun.
written, and these are quite atonal. This is, I don't know why these are atonal, but this is how they're
It's
coming
different
out.
for you.
Yeah, and I'm enjoying
That's
the, the,
fun.
the different styles. It's interesting, and each one is named after a moon. I think there's something
Ah,
like 280 different moons.
okay.
So I've got enough range there to keep me going for all 40.
That sounds like a fun program for me to put together at school with my students.
What the nice thing about that, yeah, you could quite easily have um, if you have 5 students, you got 8 pieces each. Yeah.
Right?
Mm.
Yeah. Oh, see, we just curated another program.
Thank you very much. I better
So
start writing.
this is great. I love this. This curating a program. There's more I think that goes into it than you initially realize. But then it I don't think it's brain surgery or rocket science. I think that your instincts as a musician kick in. But I think it's a really fun part of the concert preparation. I think.
I think it's interesting, and it's something we have to learn to do
Yes.
because a lot of the time we're putting programs together for our own concerts. If you're
Right.
playing an orchestra, you just turn up, the program has already been put together. But
Yeah.
if you're organizing your own concerts or workshops or whatever, it's a skill you have to acquire, and it's very
Yes.
easy to acquire, and hopefully very easy to really enjoy doing.
Right. Absolutely. I agree. Well, thank you everyone for listening. I think this is such a fun subject, and maybe we'll talk more on it another time. But thank you for joining us for season 2 of Bass Talk with Hagen and Hayes. Like and subscribe so you get notifications every time a new podcast is released. And thank you to our sponsors, Grace Gallery, and to Leatherwood Rosin, who has put out a whole new line of really great bass rosins. So thank you, everybody. I hope you stay well, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.
Bye.